Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Plant Services Tool Belt Podcast. I'm Tom Wilk, Chief Editor of Plant Services, and today I'm speaking with Per Hong, who is a partner at Kearney. Now, Per is focused on strategic operations, and he's also the lead partner for the company's relationship with the World Economic Forum. In July, Kearney and the World Economic Forum released a report titled The Resiliency Compass, Navigating Global Value Chain Disruption in an Age of Uncertainty. And in this report, suggests that plant teams, as well as the rest of us who don't work in plants, will be facing disruptions as a matter of course over the next decade. So if you're not prepared for the next major disruption, you probably should be thinking about what to do when that comes along. Here's my conversation with Per.
Welcome, Per, to the Tool Belt Podcast for Plant Services.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're talking with you today thanks to a report that was released by Kearney, and you're working for Kearney right now as Managing Director and Partner for Strategic Operations, and also you're the lead for the World Economic Forum relationship. And the World Economic Forum with Kearney has developed this report called the Resiliency Compass, Navigating Global Value Chain Disruption in an Age of Uncertainty. And let me tell you, our listeners have been experiencing this like crazy. No one anymore knows what lead times will be for spare parts. It's getting tough to plan work in general. So tell us about the report. How did it come about, and what are some of the findings that you find most compelling?
Absolutely, Tom, and thanks again for having us and being able to give me an opportunity to be able to share some of our findings. As you sort of intimated in your introduction, I have a 25-year career working with clients across a range of industries, helping them navigate disruption in their global supply chains and helping build long-term strategic advantage. We're all coming out of it over the last 18 months. And I say coming out of, we may still be, in it, in certain periods. What certainly has been the largest global supply chain disruption we've seen, within COVID, with the COVID-19 pandemic. And at the same time, we also see, and I think we're experiencing, a convergence, a confluence of other disruptive forces, whether that be climate change and some of the weather patterns and dislocation of supply and resources that's happening, technology and new technological forces that are coming in, some of the trade barriers, so raging, cyber threats, global tensions, surging demand from kind of a fragmented reopening of the global economy, all of which are intersecting in new and different and challenging ways that are radically reshaping global production, manufacturing, supply chains, and forcing companies to step back and reassess and redesign their strategies in order to build resilience at the core. And in many ways, I think COVID-19, while so many of us have adapted to the challenges that have been provided, the underlying premise for some of the research we're kicking off and the findings that we've been able to pull through the work that we've been doing in partnership with the World Economic Forum, as Kearney, is that the pandemic in many ways is but a dress rehearsal for larger and more frequent, greater levels of disruption that are continuing to happen and will continue to happen going forward. And I, certainly believe this very much to be the case, that the next generation of supply chain leaders, manufacturing and operation leaders, will be defined by our ability to withstand and adapt to these ever increasing disruptive headwinds. Whereas the last 10, 15, 20 years was an environment which really was defined by cost competitiveness, a push to the lowest common denominator in order to optimize supply chains at the core. What our experiences over the last 18 months and what we're observing on the horizon going forward is that the next 10, 15 years of supply chain excellence will be defined by finding that balance between risk competitiveness and cost competitiveness in order to be able to ensure the reliability, the adaptability, and the resilience of our supply chains and our manufacturing systems going forward.
That's fascinating because our readers, their key goal in maintenance and reliability is to reduce the risk to their immediate facilities by maintaining the assets in operating condition, whether that means predicting imminent failure, whether that means letting certain parts run to failure since it won't cause a catastrophic failure. So I can see where the interests that you have in global resilience and the interests of reliability and maintenance in risk management are going to converge here very quickly.
For sure. Now, resilience is a big topic, and
Right.
when we talk about and we think about disruptions coming from multiple sources, we are still dealing with the implications and ramifications of the pandemic itself. That has implications ranging everywhere from the availability of raw materials and commodities and sources,
Mm-hmm.
different impacts globally across the global systems, to labor and labor dislocation at the other end, where trying to get operators on the lines, drivers inside trucks in order to be able to make sure that we can get product
Mm-hmm.
to the last mile. So being able to navigate through that, we wanted to be able to take a more holistic view to what it means to be resilient, in our supply chains. And so through this, at the beginning part of this year, we engaged and surveyed um, close to 400 different senior executives from over 400 different companies,
Okay.
to try and understand what how they think about resilience, but two, to start to get under the skin of what are some of the strategies that have been deployed, but how can we think about going forward, kind of with a future ranged view, in order to be able to manage that, or can be managed. So we collected insights, from all the executives that I described. Those
Mm-hmm.
observations from those discussions, from the data that we collected, helped us really think through and codify the leading practices, some of the action-oriented strategies that companies are employing to manage the disruption and to build resilience in their global manufacturing systems going forward. So it was really underpinned by what challenges have you been facing? How well prepared do you feel in anticipating to anticipate future disruptions? What are some of the novel and new strategies that you're looking at? In order to define that, we looked at 8 different dimensions of what we call resilience excellence. And maybe it's worth kind of for your listeners and for the readers, just to kind of, if I may, maybe I can talk about what that is, because we looked at this both from, as we think about the resilience is that finding that balance between demand and supply. And so we looked at this both from a demand set of drivers as well as a supply set of drivers, and how those pieces need to start to meet. And so on the demand side, there were 4 dimensions around product, portfolio excellence, really focusing on availability through active portfolio management. So deploying strategies around simplification, modularization, really focusing on making sure the core product was being delivered and how I move through that, and what are some of the strategies to do that. Secondly, around really understanding the customer and the orientation and the strategies that companies were deploying in order to ensure proximity and focus on meeting their customer demand. Thirdly, around viability of their financials. So having financial health across the end-to-end value chain, not just within companies, but also tier 1, tier 2 suppliers that are so dependent on what we're doing, as well as what we've seen through and what we've experienced going through this pandemic is a shift in channels as well. And so the versatility to be able to meet demand in new and different ways, whether that be through the emergence of the internet and different e-commerce channels, or through alternative means in order to be able to live that. But equally, we have an operations and a supply-driven resilience that's required in order to be able to meet those challenges that are facing us from a demand point of view. So the ability to be able to really rapidly sense supply and demand shifts and pivot accordingly. So deploying advanced planning tools around, AI, AR, thinking through some of the other technology capabilities that we have available and leading companies are using to the extent in order to be able to anticipate many of these changes, develop scenarios, think through contingency planning in fundamentally different ways and through different capabilities than they certainly had opportunity to do so previously. From a supply point of view, secondly, thinking through the supplier network and managing diverse and redundant sources of supply to be able to ensure that there's continuity with backup suppliers. So, not putting all of our eggs in one basket, but also geographic diversity. There is a lot in the press, many of the strategies around thinking about bringing near shoring of production, for example, and bringing production closer to the customer and technologies that allow us to do that. But of course, that needs to be balanced with the right level of cost availability and some of the resource pieces and trying to find that. Thirdly, from an inside the four walls manufacturing adaptability point of view, strategies around how to design the production network with real resiliency in mind in terms of platforms, adaptability, moving different things around, and finally around logistics flexibility and the visibility across inventory planning and being able to think about last mile and those adaptabilities. We surveyed and looked across all 8 of those dimensions on the demand and supply chain side, and through the work and the analysis helped identifying one of the key findings out of the reports, or if you've had a chance to read it, is that only 12% of our survey respondents, or those individuals or companies that we've identified, we identified as leaders in supply chain resilience. Those that are really positioned to be able to, one, anticipate where future disruption can come from, have the strategies and the capabilities in place in order to be able to rapidly adapt to those disruptions, to be able to pivot and meet those, and thirdly, ensure the sustainability. And that for us was very surprising. 12% of companies that are prepared for the next disruption, in a meaningful way, means that it sort of indicates that there's a lot that we can learn from those 12% in terms of what they're doing, as well as opportunities for us to think through inside each of our plants and our facilities and the organizations in which we're operating. What are the strategies that we can be, knowing full well that there is disruption that's going to continue to happen. We're seeing it daily, and whether that is a cyber attack that's occurring on the pipeline on the East Coast, whether that is the heat wave that we're being played with in the West Coast right now, or the resurgence of the Delta variant, all of these factors are occurring and will continue to occur. And so it isn't a question of whether or if we will be disrupted, but when and by how big. And so then it's incumbent on us as leaders in the industry to really think through how are we going to make sure we're prepared for that.
That 12% number really caught my attention when reading the report. And then again, as you put it against the backdrop of saying that, in a way, the COVID pandemic was a dress rehearsal for the kind of things you're talking about, that's really attention getting. In a country the size of the United States, again, most of our listeners are inside the U.S., we're geographically diverse enough that, as you said, there are any number of different catastrophes can happen at the same time in different regions. And only 12% of the companies are in the position of being leaders to adapt to those changes effectively.
Absolutely. And, even inside the US, we're not insulated from disruptions that are happening outside our own borders. As we still need, raw materials are sourced, products are produced. And so there is, the dislocation of supply and the resurgence of the demand that we're seeing everywhere, on a global basis has direct impact for us here in our country that we need to be able to manage and be able to prepare for.
Interesting. About 18, 24 months ago, we did a couple of stories on resiliency in the context of cyber attacks or even with drone attacks. And it seems almost quaint now that there was a physical drone attack in Saudi in the fall of 2019, where you actually had physical drones coming in and disrupting operations. Amazingly, that refinery was up within 1 month back to regular capacity, which astonishes me. And there was a lot of talk in my industry here about how resilient that facility must have been to recover in a month and get production back up to normal. So, our readers are used to hearing this term, especially in terms of those kind of attacks and the cyber attacks, where a lot of maintenance and reliability folks do have a certain authority over the servers and may have to get rebuilt, or even if they can't be rebuilt, have influence over whether ransom gets paid. You've talked about resilience as something much larger than that, for sure. Do you see those cyber attacks as being particularly a point of focus going forward in the way less random than, say, a weather event or a pandemic, where this is something which companies absolutely should be able to prepare for?
Short answer, Tom, is yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I'm gonna build on. We know disruption. There is disruptions that are happening. At multiple levels. Cyber and cyber attacks, which we have been seeing, in a number of very visible, demonstrated examples, even in the last 6 months. Tom, there was the attack on the East Coast pipeline,
right?
The Colonial Pipeline that I referenced, the SolarWinds attack at the end of last year, which targeted nearly 80% of our Fortune 500 companies that are headquartered here were sort of impacted either directly or indirectly by some of the cases there. The technology is becoming more pervasive. I won't make any commentary on bad actors that are in the place, but opportunities that are being observed, and advantages that are being taken by finding weaknesses in the systems and the technologies that exist. This is becoming more pervasive. The attacks are becoming larger, and as companies, they are actions that we can take, and knowing that, absolutely, it is incumbent on us as and certainly what we see is senior executives also have indicated that driving these strategies, putting the investment in place in order to pursue that long-term resilience, to be able to prepare for those future disruptions. That's kind of at the core of what we're trying. What certainly some of the key themes that we saw coming out of our research and the conversations that we've been having as coming out of this research with other chief executive officers and other operating officers and leaders in manufacturing that we've been having. The threat from cyber is real. It's happening, but it's not. The threat to global supply is not isolated just to cyber. It's also occurring, from climate. We do see the weather disruptions, and while it is maybe less predictable where it's going to be happening, it is predictably unpredictable. So while no one knows for sure what the future holds, and there's lots of uncertainty, leaders and the companies that have really taken action in order to be able to put strategies in place are identifying opportunities in order to be able to for that. In fact, we saw nearly 3/4 of senior executives that we've spoken to, of the leaders, the companies that we've identified and started to work through as leaders, really cite the importance of scenario planning to be able to inform decisions, help develop and focus clear strategies, plan for these contingencies, and maintain some of the flexibility to be able to account for these different twists and turns that might happen, because I'm all of a sudden the componentry and raw materials that I was depending from one supplier are in short supply, so I have to go to backup sources of supply in order to be able to get that.
Okay.
And so the other buzzword certainly that was in the industry for, has been in the industry for a long time is this notion of agility and adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
It's really kind of the differentiator for supply chains. What I think we've experienced and are continuing to experience now, and will, and anticipate will be experiencing going forward, is the need to be able to continue to adapt that across the value chain, and that impacts us inside our four walls of manufacturing, but our inability able to secure inventory and raw materials for work in process materials, or an ability to be able to get containers and ships to be able to deliver this to end consumer impacts us inside our plants as well.
Right.
So it's happening at every step of the entire value chain.
Well, and you're talking to an audience, which interestingly, the maintenance techs, reliability engineers, one of their areas of core competence is that they'll figure out the solution given the resources at hand.
100%, right?
Yeah, it's a very agile audience, and sometimes I think they think they're the last to know about developments, and sometimes I think they're dead on about that. But no matter what they know, coming down the pipeline, they're very attuned to doing the job with what's on hand, and then figuring out how to be agile and procure those parts, whether it's 3D printing, whether it's online resourcing. As you said, the internet's really changed a lot of the way people can source parts. So when it comes to champions of resilience, I can see where some might be coming from this sector, maintenance reliability. Did you see a pattern in your research identifying where internal champions for resilience might come from to help drive this among those 12% of leaders, or is it sort of all across the board throughout the company?
The champions for resilience, the individuals inside the companies that are really feeling it on the front lines and have had, the individuals who really had to adapt and change the ways of working are the ones that are the biggest champions and proponents for driving resilience and resilient strategies going forward. Mm-hmm. And so that is the global heads of supply chains, the directors of manufacturing, our chief operating officers. Those are the individuals that really both feel the core, and observe and anticipate the risks associated to supply, from mm-hmm. demand in fundamentally different ways than other individuals within a corporate ecosystem necessarily feel. So our champions of resilience definitely are, kind of that audience of focused individuals.
Okay. And I know increasingly we see maintenance being either restructured or repositioned under operations. So there's a lot of contact with the COO in that regard.
Right. Yeah, well, we've seen that too. Actually, a big shift towards kind of that operating kind of holistic view of kind of managing that end to end in order to be able to secure resilience, because there's so many required. So maintenance being, a part of a broader system rather than being managed as a functional, within a functional silo.
Right. And there's been a push to see maintenance as not a profit driver exactly, but as not a cost center, to take them from their siloed position and work them into a place where you can see what the impact of reliability is in the bottom line, where they're going to help drive some profit and get a return on the technology investments in maintenance reliability.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
right. Well, this will be the last question for us, and it touches on the skills gap that industry is currently facing. Been facing for a while, especially due to retirements. You've got a generation which is retiring with a lot of tribal knowledge, certainly, but also translatable skills across assets. One of the strategies that's emerging is that facilities, sometimes whole companies, are now more comfortable contracting outside the immediate facility and bringing on a third-party partner for either part-time maintenance services, occasionally full-time maintenance services. A lot of OEMs are designing equipment that they consider to be so complex that they themselves insist on taking on the maintenance responsibility and build that into the price of the asset. So you're seeing more of a willingness than even 5 years ago for traditional maintenance teams, reliability teams, to look outside the four walls of the company and partner to get the work done. And that's a backdrop to the question about an organization you mentioned in your report, which is the Platform for Advanced Manufacturing and Production. It sounds like a group that's been either formed or is emerging from your research, which can help plants in the same way that these teams are getting help from other third parties, that this organization can help plants with resiliency challenges too. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that group and their role in this.
Yes, and there's you touched on a couple of certainly aspects around and the critical dimension, and we often talk about technology and the importance and the drive inside of our plants, but at the core, we do have and we are faced with a labor challenge at the core of this as well. And you were making reference to that, and maybe you'll let me sort of also opine on this a little bit, Tom.
Sure.
The leaders towards around resiliency, particularly inside the four walls, have one identified opportunity to really build a multi-skilled, adaptable workforce. So taking your workforce, and you're starting to reference, one, to avoid some of the labor shortages, but also by using the skills and backgrounds and fully utilizing all of our employees from different functions to be able to cover absenteeisms, to be able to drive more flexibility in the labor pool, to kind of adapt to the challenges that we've seen and some of those pieces, which I think has a benefit, not only just to optimize the labor, but also to start to share capabilities and develop labor that offers really a unique opportunity to expose employees to different situations and challenges and to be able to share that. But there's also the notion of pooling resources and outsource. You were talking about sort of working with third parties,
right,
to be thinking about our labor pool more within the system that's required in order to be able to deliver the product, rather than just the specific company in which I'm operating, right? So being able to react to changing demand patterns, particularly in labor intensive industries, while still driving some of the flexibility and meeting peak demand has led to some of the strategies that you're referencing. The group that you referenced, our Platform of Advanced Manufacturing and Supply Systems, that is a collection, of companies, under, with the World Economic Forum, that are partnering together precisely to share in a pre-competitive environment, right? So not sharing competitive practices, but to be able to share and talk about some of the strategies, these issues that we're talking about today across the range of resiliency, and being able to partner with others who are going through similar challenges and identify what are the opportunities to be able to both have the support, knowing that others are going through these same challenges and what are some of the strategies you can employ, but also to be able to learn from one another and to be able to employ some of the leading practices in order to be able to manage that going forward. Okay. So this is a group of companies that have come together. Within the advanced platform, there's probably close to 400, 500 companies that actively participate with the World Economic Forum. And if your readers are interested in more information about that and what that entails, certainly they're happy to reach out to us and our firm, or to the World Economic Forum, who'd be more than happy to talk and share more information about how to get involved and get engaged with the Advanced Manufacturing Platform.
Terrific. We'll put that information in the podcast notes area for sure, Per, and both to links to the Kearney and to the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, fantastic.
That's great.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, and just thinking too that with what you were talking about, this outreach, I mean, on the side of maintenance, Plant Services as a brand is focusing tightly on how to have the kind of conversations you're talking about, where the maintenance teams don't have to be the traditional sort of rescue when something breaks teams. and we're trying to encourage a shift into more proactive thinking, reaching out and building response plans.
Yeah, because traditionally, our maintenance teams, we're inside the four walls. We're always dependent on to react when things go wrong, and similarly, taking this even broader within securing inventory or thinking about the disruptions. We're reacting to a lot of crises that are happening across the world. As a result of all these crises that are happening inside the four walls, to the extent that from a maintenance services point of view and from a plant services point of view, understanding the strategies and how that fits within the broader global ecosystem so that we can be more proactive in anticipating those challenges, putting the contingencies in place, anticipating where those potential shutdowns, where labor shortages could be happening, so that we can put, to ensure that there's more effective utilization of our assets, and most importantly, there's this dislocation is a lot of it driven because we're seeing resurgent demand. The latest economic report was released this morning. I don't know if you had a chance to see that, Tom, but we saw
I have not yet.
U.S. economy that was showing year-over-year growth of over 6%. So we're seeing demand, back on the rise. The U.S. economy, is in a much better situation than the rest of the world, which is still dealing with many of these pieces. But those challenges, for us to be able to capture that, this is an opportunity that if we don't have the ability to be able to pivot to meet the need and to be able to ensure we've got the right resiliency, as we've seen, that all can turn on a dime very quickly.
Right.
With the next crisis. So how do we learn from what we've just experienced to make sure that we're best prepared wherever that uncertainty may come from? Because we can't look at the crystal ball and predict it, but I can't say with certainty that there will be uncertainty.
You're making me think that over the next 2 years at maintenance conferences, instead of war stories about an asset that went down and got repaired, it's going to be war stories about, well, I survived Hurricane Sandy. Well, I survived locusts invading. Well, I survived.
I survived the cyber attack. I survived. Right. Exactly right.
Well, Per, thank you for being with us today. And we really appreciate your view on not just the global value chain, but against the backdrop of really at this point, anything can happen and will.
My pleasure, Tom. And it's a pleasure to talk with you and wish you all the luck. And so to all your listeners and your readers, maybe the top line message for all of us is we've got, there is uncertainty and there almost certainly will be disruption, but we have the tools, the capabilities through the technology and our ability to be able, as we've seen, to be able to withstand that, learn from it, and to be able to be better and stronger going forward.
Well, fantastic. Once again, thank you for being here, Per.
No, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Tom.